Thanks so much, Eleonora. So I'm really, really excited about this session. Health prevention is such a critical issue for all of us, and particularly as we're emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic. And Eleonora, she mentioned my work with the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity, and of course we published our Health of the Nation strategy in February, and doing a lot of work since then, looking at the lessons learned from COVID. And of course, more than anything, it's highlighting the focus on health prevention, more than ever. So very pleased to have our group of panelists today who are all involved in their own ways on the health prevention sort of agenda. So I'd like first, I'll very quickly introduce our panel. So our first panelist is Tom Watson. Many of you will know as the former Labour Deputy PM, but of course, former Labour Deputy, I should say. But of course, now he wears the hat of Chair of UK Music, and he's also the author of the best-selling book called Downsizing. We all could see before our eyes that Tom lost a lot of weight, on the TV cameras. And this book is all how he lost 8 stone and reversed his diabetes and regained his health. So really looking forward to hearing from him on his journey. Next, we're going to have Tim Spector. And of course, many of you will know Tim. He is the head of Department of Twin Research at King's College London and Genetic Epidemiology. He is an expert in microbiome. Many of you will know that microbiome is one of the hottest topics in health today. An expert in diet, and of course has authored several books, including The Diet Myth and the soon to be available, I think coming out in August, if I'm correct, on spoon-fed, why almost everything we've been told about food is wrong. So we're going to hear about Tim about his research and all the sort of the pseudoscience that needs to be called out. He also led the COVID-19 symptom app called Zoe, which of course was talked about yesterday. So Tim is obviously a very, very busy man. Next, I'd like to introduce Markus Stripf, who is the co-founder and co-CEO of Spoon Guru, a really, really interesting business that uses AI to help us with our food choices, working with supermarkets. He also has been hugely involved in sort of digital transformation, business transformation, groceries, grocery stores, etc. So he has some really, really interesting experience that he'll share with us. And finally, Anton Derlyatka, who is the CEO and co-founder of Sweatcoin. So I know Sweatcoin really well. My 3 sons used it 3 or 4 years ago when it first came out. And it is an incredible digital platform rewarding healthy behaviors. So, and of course, I interviewed actually Anton for my book, in fact, and fascinating business. And he'll tell us a little bit more about, the behavioral change challenges of keeping our health going. So I'm going to so we'll have so the format is everyone will have sort of a few minutes to kind of share where they've come from, their journey, their whole sort of I guess experience in the health prevention sector. So we're going to start with Tom, and then we'll go through our speakers, and we'll have a sort of a question or two in between each of the sessions, and then at the end we'll have a kind of a free-form discussion depending on the questions that come through on the chat line. So I'm going to start with Tom. So Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Tina, and thank you for putting me on such an august panel of experts. It's I'm genuinely daunted with the expertise I'm on a platform with. Look, the book I wrote, Downsizing, is a little bit of an eating memoir. The story of how I ended up becoming 22 stone with type 2 diabetes, with hypertension, obesity, and heading to an early death. And the journey I took in health and nutrition to get well again. And the lessons I learned from that in terms of what that can mean for public policy, and the sort of discussions I think we need to be having to get the nation healthy again. And that was all before COVID. And actually, but having sort of flicked through it again this week, I don't think some of the conclusions I made prior to COVID are underestimated, are unnecessary now. In fact, I think there's a greater urgency when you look at some of the research into the people that are really very badly affected by COVID and some of their sort of comorbidities that seem to mean that they're more vulnerable to harsher impact. And for me, I really hit rock bottom when I hit 50. I mean, in many senses, mine is a classic story of a middle-aged man in denial. And it was only when I hit 51 and started to get healthy again that I decided that I wanted to live for another 51 years. When I lifted the brain fog, when I brought my blood pressure down, my blood glucose levels down, when I felt that I was living in the moment again, when I felt that through a combination of nutrition and exercise, I'd got my mental acuity back. It almost felt like my IQ had gone up. I started to get very angry about how hard it was to join all the dots to get to a point where you were healthy again. And sort of concluded that really for the millions of people with type 2 diabetes in particular, which is my interest, the system really is stacked against them. It's very hard for them to get themselves out of their condition. And yet the research suggests that, you know, maybe 2 million out of the 3.5 million identified type 2 diabetics in Britain could rid themselves of their medication with a combination of changed nutrition and exercise. And then I started thinking about longevity more generally. And this is why I'm so pleased about the work you're doing, Tina. Because it seems to me the actual shift we've got to get from in public policy terms, at its essence, is instead of investing everyone's intellectual energy and resource into finding solutions for how you live with the main killer diseases for longer, the real challenge is to get people to live longer before they contract those or before they get those diseases. I'm talking about cancer, dementia, and cardiovascular disease that kills 80% of us eventually. And if you look at some of those supercentenarians, the thing that is unique to all of them is they just get ill later in life. And some of this takes us straight to health prevention. Nutrition, well-being, exercise and sleep, the 4 pillars of good health, aligning them to better public policy. And that's where I think the challenge is, and that's where I think we need a paradigm shift. If you look at nutrition, you know, I think the days of the eat well plate got to be over. I think we're looking at the requirement for bespoke nutrition advice at GP level. It seems to me that the most revolutionary diagnostic device thus invented is the continuous glucose monitor that puts patients in touch with the food they put into themselves and the reaction that their own physiology has to that. And in well-being, in industrial relations, in employment law, we could be looking at how well-being can be part of our daily lives in the workplace. Exercise, I still don't know, despite all the investment in exercise science, what is the best exercise for longevity? What is the dose response required? How many hours or minutes of zone 2 training should I be doing a day? Should I be doing HIIT exercises? What can we do to get people into an optimum state of physical exercise? And finally, sleep. Maybe it's a pillar of our health. Personally, I think it's a foundation on health. I obsessively monitor my sleep these days, and I think that genuinely helped bring my blood pressure down, helped deal with insulin resistance, gave me a whole sort of new approach to health. It seems to me that the world is desperate, or certainly the Western world is desperate, for a national sleep strategy, from our building regulations about how we can keep our bedrooms soundproofed and dark, to how shift patterns can be changed, to how we can do public education campaigns to try and allow people to aspire to get 8 hours of unbroken healthy sleep. And if we can have a paradigm shift and a national focus on those 4 pillars, I think that we can enhance the cognitive health of the nation. We can be a more tolerant, healthier, longer living society.
Excellent. So, just a question, just before we go to Tim. How did you? Was there a particular sort of trigger that for you that made you decide to go on your whole sort of weight loss strategy? Because for a lot of people, there's a health scare, or is it just a sort of a realization that you just felt, well, I want another 51 years, you know, and maybe you were inspired by something? What was really the trigger?
There wasn't a single epiphany moment, but there were a series of events. But at the heart of it was a tiny voice that was telling me I wanted to live for my children. I've got a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old. And I didn't want to die, and I thought I was going to die. I got to a point where I was so unhealthy that I thought the first thing I did when I woke up in the morning was work out, ask myself which part of me aches the most. And as soon as I changed my nutrition, within weeks, that didn't happen anymore, and I just felt brighter. So it was really a will to live for my children.
And where did you get your inspiration and information on nutrition? Because that's a huge topic. In fact, I was involved in a series of roundtables last month, to do with the Health of the Nation work, and nutrition and tackling the obesity crisis was something that came out over and over and over again. So where did you get your information? Because there's a lot of sort of pseudo information around on nutrition, which Tim will talk about.
There's a whole load of it. I'm sure that some of the stuff I read had a placebo effect and probably wasn't valid in science, but it got me in the right place. It started with actually Michael Mosley, who was a credible science writer. And I read one of his books on a Kindle, and I thought I was so interested in what he said. I went to the footnotes and I read the research papers from there. But actually, the journey of joining up the whole piece was the interesting thing. So I found Edith Hall's book on Aristotle very helpful because I needed to get into mindset. And it was I didn't realise that Aristotle was the first ever self-help guru. The idea of creating habits and dispelling negative habits. So I read B.J. Fogg, I read Tiny Habits, and I gave myself little daily routines and rewards, and every incremental gain I banked, and I still do that. So now if I do a presser, instead of thinking, oh my God, I've got to do a presser, I think of the joy of feeling how you feel when you've actually done the press up. And then I go into the press up and I think, this is going to be great. I'm going to feel the I get 3 points of happiness in a single press up, whereas before it was a miserable experience that I had to endure. And so mindset was key to me. And it was a classic that got me through it. And,
you have to be ready for it, don't you?
And that's why you need joined up policy, I think, because you're not just going to do it if you preach at people.
So I have to ask you this. What do you think about the war on fat that Boris Johnson sort of announced a little while ago?
Well, in one sense, I saw that as an acknowledgement that his previous comments, describing the sugar levy as a sin tax is really was so egregious. Because I think George Osborne's greatest legacy will be the sugar levy. It's a massive reformulation in soda pop. When 4 out of 10 kids are leaving primary school overweight or obese, that's a big deal. And I think he's probably saved thousands of lives. And the epidemiologists here will be able to say how many lives he's probably saved with that one policy. So I think if he's going to give his prime ministerial stamp to a national focus on changed nutrition and active lifestyles, then that could be a great legacy for Boris Johnson.
Okay, and one very quick question that's just come through from one of our viewers. What was the biggest difficulty you faced to stay disciplined and consistent? And I would imagine with your fitness plan, and I would imagine particularly through the COVID, sort of lockdown period. Just a quick comment on that.
So the fitness plan now, during COVID, not being able to lift weights in the gym, actually on the start of the journey, I had to get into a mindset where I realised I was a sugar addict, and I still consider myself a sugar addict, and that if I took any confectionery with refined sugar in it, I'd be on a treadmill. And so not eating things with refined sugar in was the challenge, and I went through a form of withdrawal, I think. But once you get through it, you feel so great. You never want to go back to it.
Give yourself a star. That's fantastic, Tom. Well, thank you so much. So I'm going to hand over to Tim now, who will tell us about his work and pick up on some of the points that you made, Tom. So Tim, over to you. Oh, you're on mute. Oh. There we go.
Thanks very much. I've written 2 books on food, The Diet Myth and recently Spoon Fed, which is available soon. And both of them have questioned really the dogma about food. The first was a lot about the myths of that we've been brought up with, calories in, calories out, The fat is always bad for you. And more recent one, Spoon-Fed, has focused about how the food industry has actually manipulated a lot of the research and a lot of the discussions, and ended up that the UK is the #1 consumer of ultra-processed foods, and why we've got in this mess that causes all these problems and massive obesity and diabetes. But rather than talk about the sort of politics, I wanted to just give people an edge of excitement, which I think is the optimism about where the new science is driving us, this big data approach to nutrition, realizing that nutrition is not as simple as we've been told or we've been spoon-fed by the companies, by government, into this very narrow idea of it's all about calories, it's all about macronutrients, and if you just put a few simple things on a label, you'll be able to lose weight and be healthy, which is complete nonsense. So we've just performed a landmark study on nutrition called the PREDICT study of 1,100 people, mostly twins, which totally changes the landscape of nutrition. I think is groundbreaking in the scale and impact. Most nutrition studies have been pretty pathetic. If you get 30 people, you seem to be doing quite well in it. It's because it's been chronically underfunded for years. This study comes out in a couple of days' time in Nature Medicine, and you can read more about it, those who are interested. But I think there's about 5 or 6 really key points that come out of that study. And the first is that we all respond differently to identical foods. In the study, these 1,000 people, we gave identical meals to them, and they responded completely different metabolically. And that's never been really discussed before, because everyone's always talked about means and averages and ignored the fact that everybody there's like tenfold differences in response to the same food in normal people. People have said, oh yes, that's because they have diabetes or they have some other problem, but normal people respond very differently. And this is also true in identical twins who share 100% of all their genomes in every cell in their body. If identical twins end up responding differently to fats or sugars, so all of us do. And that merely means that one-size-fits-all advice doesn't work. And so that's really important. And the eat well plate and all this kind of nonsense really just be stuck in the dustbin. Now, the other thing we found is these response to foods result in your sugar levels going up, your insulin going up, or if you're eating fats, your blood fats going up. And all of these are cause some stress on the body to various extents and lead to inflammation. And this inflammation, if it's repeated, can also cause weight gain as other metabolic problems. So we've realized that one of the keys to this is reducing those stresses and those responses. Now, we also found out that in this study, which again, the scale of it is massive. We were giving, everyone had glucose monitors, everyone had multiple blood tests in the hospital for 10 time points. We kept them in for 8 hours, and it's never been done on this scale before. And we showed that calories and the macronutrient content of what we were giving people to eat had only a very limited impact on the metabolic responses, on how you reacted to the food, and as did genetics. So these are only minor players, and it's much more holistic how everyone responds to these things. And we worked out that actually how you eat and when you eat and the context of how you eat, as Tom was explaining about the importance of sleep and exercise, has a really big effect on how you will respond to the food you're eating afterwards. And this isn't something we've ever been taught about. We've always been said, oh, well, if you eat this calorie-reduced packet of processed food, you're bound to lose weight. And this is just nonsense, because we're constantly snacking, and we now know that's bad. We should be leaving much more of fasting intervals. And then the key, and this was a real part of the Diet Myth book, was that the gut microbiome is probably at the heart of all this. And it's the heart of our individuality. no two people have the same gut microbes. Even identical twins share only about a third of their gut microbes with each other. And so this is key for what determines the best diet and how to stay healthy. And that's generally true for everybody. Everybody needs to think when they're eating, how is this going to affect my gut microbes, which will affect their immunity, their inflammation. And this is crucial in the current age, even for preventing or reducing the effects of COVID. So finally, you know, all this AI, this data has been amazing. And they've heard we started this COVID symptom app on March the 24th. It's the biggest citizen science project in the world. And we now have 3.4 million people in the UK who've downloaded it. And we're getting amazing data on this whole range of symptoms. And it works because we can predict with algorithms exactly who's actually got the disease and how we can work out which symptoms are important. Now, the fact that 3.4 million people means that people are now embracing apps as part of their everyday. We have 1.5 million people who, for the last at least 2 months, have been logging on every single day, telling us about their own symptoms. So this is the future. This is normal. And so next month we're doing the same thing around nutrition, launching an app with this company we'll work with called Zoe, all based on AI. And this is to help personalize diets. And so people themselves can smooth out these peaks, reduce inflammation, and pick the right foods themselves. And so I think it's a very exciting time in nutrition. We've turned a corner, thrown out a lot of the old garbage and myths, and we can really move forward and look forward to a new age where we get precision nutrition, and all of us can be citizen scientists experimenting with our own bodies.
Fantastic, Tim. So interesting. And I have a bunch of questions, and there's a couple that are coming through the chat lines as well. So I've got a couple of questions for you. I mean, we go into the whole resilience issue and how the latest science is showing us how we might help improve health resilience. And of course, you know, the science of aging. These are all the things that we're exploring actually in a later session. But just to pick up on a couple of points that you make, first of all, our viewers might be just interested to know, like, what would you see as the top 3 myths that need to be busted straight away? So that's my first question. And then my second question is, you talk about big data and obviously the microbiome, you know, our response to food, you know, this is the hotbed of scientific research. What sort of data, if we're a citizen scientist, what is the sort of data that we should be sharing to really get under the skin of, you know, the mysteries and the science behind how our genes and our environment sort of work together? So those are my 2 sort of questions before we move on to Markus.
All right. So there's in the new book, I've got 22 myths.
Yes, and I read your book. It's brilliant.
If I had to pick 3. It's upsetting we're still talking about it, but actually the BBC is still pumping out programs about all calories being equal and calories in equals calories out. And I was involved in a Horizon program where, you know, terrible, you know, falsehoods were said about, oh, you know, you can calculate your calories, you can burn it off with this, you know, 30 minutes on a treadmill. It's complete nonsense. And calories in equals calorie out is a completely useless concept, and anyone should be shot for saying it, basically. And so that's the number one thing, because calories are not equal. We all respond differently to identical calories. You can't measure them anyway, and the calories in whether it's chickpeas or almonds will vary how your body uses it as fuel completely differently in the form it's in. So that's the first one. The second one is probably I think the general myth that exercise alone can sort out your body weight. And this is a myth really driven by the industry that wants to give you fizzy drinks while you're exercising, and kids in schools because okay, kids, go in the playground, then you can have your fizzy drink afterwards because you've burnt it off. Yeah. That's complete nonsense. If I had to pick the third one, I think it's still the idea that fat is bad. And again, we should have moved on from this. You know, some people do very well on high-fat diets. Just have to look at Tom. some people don't do as well on them, and there's good fats and there's bad fats. But one of the healthiest foods in the world is extra virgin olive oil. That's full of saturated fat. That's much better than eating carbs, by having chips or whatever. So I think there's 20 others, but let's start with get those out of the way and move on to the more interesting ones.
So I'm going to just stop you just very quickly, just because I've got a couple of questions that have come through before we go on to the big data question. What is your view, or citizen science question, what is your view of clinical and research evidence supporting high doses of vitamin C to treat ICU patients with serious viral infections? So that's the first question. And then a question on meal timings, whether to have breakfast and how sleep affects metabolism. So very quick comments on those two questions, please.
Well, I think that the vitamin C stuff is really anecdotal. It has to be put to a proper randomized controlled trial. The last 100 years, we've been conned by anecdotal peddling of vitamins. And people who know me will know I'm not a big fan of vitamins until it's been shown in a randomized controlled trial. So I have an open mind, but I'm only going to believe randomized controlled trials. And 99% of all vitamins fail that test. So, and that distracts people from having good meals and good food. The other question was, remind me.
Timing, about meal timing, whether to have breakfast and how it affects metabolism.
So definitely some people should skip breakfast. Breakfast is a modern invention, probably invented by Mr. Kellogg, and pushed on everybody, and mothers meant to feel guilty if they don't give their kids breakfast. And it turns out that everyone's got a different chronobiology. So some people actually feel they really need to eat in the mornings and less so in the evenings, and others, that's not true. But the randomized controlled trials show that on average, people who skip breakfast certainly don't gain weight, as used to be the myth. And many of them lose weight. So I think to everybody, try it yourself, see what suits your own body. But the longer you leave fasting, if you can go for more than 12 hours overnight, ideally 14, that's a way of losing weight without actually changing the total amount you eat. And that's called restrictive time eating. So that's definitely a hot topic for the next decade. Everyone is going to be doing this, but probably needing apps to help them.
Okay, so I'm going to park my question on the citizen science because I know we're going through time and I want to make sure the other two, but let's have a general discussion about that. What is the information we want to be collecting via our apps? So, which is obviously relevant for everyone here. So thank you so much, Tim, that's excellent. So I'm going to go to Markus now, who will tell us a little bit about what his business Spoon Guru does and the whole health behavior challenge, how that also addresses it. Over to you, Markus.
Thank you, Tina. Hello. Yes, we are an AI-based health and wellness platform, and we license our technology to retailers around the world. And our purpose really is to help people find suitable foods for whatever dietary preference or health objective they may have. Finding foods when you have specific dietary requirements can be an enormous struggle. 64% of the world's population is now on some form of exclusion diet. The vast majority of us, in fact 76% of the population, want to lead healthier lives, but only a fraction of us manage to accomplish our goals. And there's a number of reasons for that. It can be time-consuming, cumbersome, frustrating, expensive to find suitable foods if you have very specific individual requirements. There was a study published recently that showed that only 1 in 4 UK shoppers think the supermarkets are doing enough to support their health. But the most astonishing stat I'm aware of is that 76% of people with a specific dietary preference have eaten something they shouldn't have in any given month. And we think that needn't be the case in this day and age with advances in technology, specifically with regard to AI-based personalized nutrition technologies. Those type of scenarios can easily be addressed. We use AI and machine learning to power and enable food consumption scenarios that are highly personalized and individual. AI really comes into its own in 3 distinct areas. First of all, it excels at making sense of unstructured data. and it allows us to respond to highly complex consumer preferences. It's also highly accurate and scalable, but most importantly, it can really power food search and discovery scenarios across an array of sectors, whether it's eating at home, trying to find suitable restaurants, or even shopping in supermarkets. AI-based technologies can enable you to find exactly the right foods that meet your individual requirements. Food as medicine is becoming a thing. There's a famous quote, let food be thy medicine and let medicine be thy food. It's often been attributed to Hippocrates, who lived more than 2,500 years ago. The fact of the matter is science is now catching up with ancient knowledge. What we are learning about the microbiome and the vagus nerve and the gut-brain connection shows us that we truly are what we eat. You truly are what you eat. And we know, coming out of the current health crisis specifically, we know people are trying to be healthier. Some of us need to be healthier. And we believe that eating smart is being smart. And we build technology solutions that hopefully enable people to lead healthier lives.
Fantastic, Markus. So just tell us a little bit more about what the app is and how you're working with supermarkets. So if I were, to download your app, what would it help me with, and what are the sorts of deals that you have with supermarkets? How does that sort of work?
Sure. We are a platform. We use AI and machine learning to reclassify product catalogs and recipes. We process hundreds and hundreds of thousands of products and in recipes for our clients. So the way we work with supermarkets is they send us the entire product catalog. We augment and enhance the core product data with additional dietary attributes to make those products searchable for people who have any type of dietary preference or health objective. So the way we work with supermarkets, they send us their product catalogs on a daily basis, and then we run it through our algorithms. And we crunch billions and billions of data points in order to make sense of unstructured data. And we then send those enhanced product catalogs back to our partners, and that allows them to provide a highly personalized shopping experience. We also have technology. We've built technology that allows people to look at healthier alternatives. We have a feature called Healthy Swaps that allows you to, if you may be looking at a chocolate bar, our technology shows 5 other examples that are chocolate bars but are better for you because they may have lower sugar or a higher fiber content. Those type of technologies really encourage people to make better choices. And we also strongly believe people require nudging to help them meet their goals. We know that most people want to lead healthier lives, but a lot of us struggle because it's just too difficult. But what we've seen in our partnerships with supermarkets is that when you give people the capability and the tools to make better choices, they embrace them. So just an example, one of our partners, the top 10 dietary filters they offer to their customers, half of those are health filters. So again, people embrace the capabilities. People actively seek out tools to allow them to make better and more informed choices.
Fantastic. Really fascinating. I've got so many questions to ask you, but I've been reminded that we better not, I'm going to make sure that Anton has his chance to say the very important work that he's been doing on the fitness side. So I'm just going to hand over to Anton. I've got a whole slew of questions that we'll see how far we can get at the end. So Anton, I'm going to hand over to you now, Anton.
Thank you, Tina. And I would really like to pick up on Markus's points and also Tom's, that a lot of people want to lead a healthy lifestyle, but it's so hard. And I think the question is, and for all of us, it's really important to understand why that's the case. And thinking, going into behavioral kind of science and understanding the human. Actually, it is very, very difficult to be healthy, and we're talking about physical activity, for example. We are not actually wired to be physically active. It's exactly the opposite. We live in an energy preservation mode, and quite the opposite in terms of food. Why is that so prevalent with us humans consuming some unhealthy food? And again, the food lobby is doing their best just to make sure that we get addicted to some unhealthy stuff, just because we get instant gratification from that. So it's a really interesting question. How do you actually try to influence people's behaviors, if you can, in a good way? Because right now it's been proven that, you know, eating healthy is good for you. It's been proven that exercise is good for you. And indeed, they work only in combination. For diabetes, you know, neither of the two is enough. It has to be both. So I think right now is a perfect time to come up with some solutions that would create a population scale behavior change, something that would provide those constant nudges for people to make the choices that are good for them, be those choices of a healthy diet or a physical activity. And the fitness industry at large has done a great job at promoting the healthy lifestyle values, you know, physical activity, going out for a run, and things like that. The truth is, unfortunately, only about 30% of the world population still react well to the traditional motivational techniques. Because let's face it, it's very, very hard to become a runner. You know, some people like Tom, they are like literally privileged because what he's done, he's achieved is incredible. Because he was at the edge and then he found some strength to change his routines, to obtain new habits. And that's incredible. And yet only a few, like a relatively few people have enough strength to do that. So we need to help a lot of people, about that 70% of the world population, to adopt new habits. And the best way to do that is through small nudges, as opposed to asking somebody to do a 5K or all of a sudden switch to a completely healthy diet. So we need to move in small steps, and we need to come up with solutions that are available to near 100% of the population. Because one of the biggest challenges has always been personalization. It's extremely difficult to be personal, to provide personalized service at scale, because personalization usually means very high cost. I think right now we're at a stage where technology enables us to be both personal and inexpensive. Right now, it's an amazing opportunity for all of us. In terms of how we do it at Sweatcoin, it's a very simple platform that is available to everybody. People can download an app for free, and the app literally does what it says on the tin. It rewards healthier choices. It rewards physical activity. It rewards physical activity in its simplest form steps. And the plan is to expand it to things like, for example, dietary choices and other things.
Fantastic, Anton. Now, I, of course, know you quite well, and I mentioned my sons even have used your Sweatcoin. So I think, you know, for people like my sons and Tom, you know, there's intrinsic motivations to use this, but I'm very, very fascinated. Wanted to ask you one question. We hear more and more, and of course, COVID is teaching us, you know, how the whole about health inequalities and how we can help our most vulnerable communities. And, you know, there's all the data that shows that stress environments has a huge bearing on obesity, et cetera, and what we eat. And of course, unhealthy foods, you know, if you go to a poor area, has many more KFC shops than in a richer area. So there are all these different things that we have to tackle. But just tell, Anton, just tell us a little bit about because you're starting to work more in public sector as well to address that very, very reality. Tell us a little bit more about that, and then I'll open up discussion.
Yeah.
We have a few more minutes, actually, we've been given, so that's good.
Amazing. So a couple of things on disengaged communities and various socio-demographic stratas. You know, there's a couple of impediments, really, a couple of barriers. One is availability. Obviously, you know, a product or a solution has to be available to everybody, and it has to be very easy to adopt. You don't have to, you know, do a lot of things or, you know, to overcome lots of barriers to start using it. So I think that's one. The second one is engagement, because it's very, very hard for healthcare services to engage with users on a daily basis. The problem being is that we typically, and luckily, we are healthy most of the time. So we don't have an intrinsic reason to engage with a healthcare product when we are healthy. And by the time that we get ill, we haven't adopted this habit, so to speak. So it's very, very important to build something that would be both available and engaging on a daily basis. So I think that's why the platforms like Markus's, you know, that's why platforms like Sweatcoin have a really good opportunity, because they're building an engaged base. Yeah. And that engaged base is non-discriminated depending on your income level or your behaviors or locations where you live. And on top of such platform, you can then develop, a very, very targeted interventions focused on particular groups. For example, we've been running a really successful pilot project with NHS and Merton, whereby we would engage a group of pre-diabetic patients that, essentially, and try to do a slightly improved pre-diabetes prevention program. Because right now, the retention and engagement of such programs that are being run are quite low, which means that a vast majority of patients participating, they never end or they never finish that program, which means that they almost surely develop diabetes too. Now, with us, the levels of engagement against this are very early days, but we've delivered a very, very high levels of engagement with the pre-diabetic patients through specific mechanics, because we can personalize their experiences. They feel engaged, they feel connected to each other, they feel connected to the cause, because again, social pressures, social prescribing are massively important factors that can influence and instill new behaviors and new habits.
Yeah. Fascinating, really interesting work. So I'm going to take a couple of questions that have come to the chat line, but I'm going to put them in context. So with the work that I do, I'm really fascinated. We've got to get away from this view that it's only the NHS that look after our health. It's all of us. It's business. It's communities. It's all of us together. We have to be much more cross-sector and multi-dimensional about this. So one of the questions so I think everyone has a role to play, whatever hat you're wearing. There's a question here on, why does it take so long to bust myths created by healthcare business lobbies? Is there some fundamental issues that needs to be addressed for better health? So with that, I'm fascinated by this concept of commercial determinants of health, the role of business in either promoting positive or negative determinants of health. So I just wanted a comment from all of you wearing your respective hats, what your perspective is on that, how we can, this issue with the lobby, how we can encourage business to do more good things rather than the negative things. So I'm going to turn to Tom first, and I'm going to go round just for a final discussion before we're kicked out of the virtual room. I
was deeply honoured to interview and meet Dr. Marion Nessel, who wrote the book Soda Wars, and was actually followed by agents working for Coca-Cola. She told me that Coca-Cola, she estimated their global spend on lobbying against measures to reduce refined sugar in our diets was about $100 million. Right, that's bigger than the breweries, that's bigger than tobacco, that's bigger than the gambling. So any sector lobby parliaments, that's a huge lobby. And I think the only way you overcome that is by governments deciding they want an independent research fund for nutritional science. I think the retailers have got, the big supermarkets have got a real responsibility here to make sure real choice on the shelves. And that requires political leadership. And dare I say it, the hardest thing to find in politics, a political consensus across the house. The thing that unites everyone is everyone knows there's too much sugar in our diets. How do we get it out? And if you start on some of those, start as that as a benchmark, I think we can make progress.
Excellent. Tim, over to you.
So agree with what Tom's just said. From my perspective, I know that nutrition departments are often underfunded by government. They don't get big grants. They're seen as the poor science. It's a recent science. It's not on the same par as genetics or physics or anything else. And so they are dependent on the food industry, many of them, not all of them, for many grants. And these grants come with a particular research agenda. So continually, the papers that are being put out there are just mirroring what the food industry wants to see, and then which helps them on their food labels. So we have this cycle that we spend, proportionally, I think it was 1,000 times more on HIV patients than we do on obesity and nutrition. And we've got into this, rare disease we pay for. We're really just not taking nutrition research seriously enough. And then when we do, we leave it up to the companies to fund these other groups. And they also, the companies have a seat at the table on all these policy making decisions. So decide how much fat we should have in our diet and what is considered low fat or low protein or high protein or low cal that goes on the labels is basically, they have vetoes on this in these committees. And so they're far too involved in this. And half the people of the nutrition experts who sit on them have actually received grants or consultancies from these companies. So the whole thing really just needs to be radically changed if we're going to move forward on this, and move from being the worst country in Europe to the best. Yeah,
that's great, Tim. So I'm going to let Markus and also Anton comment. So Markus, how can we get retailers sort of on this mission then, and supermarkets?
What we are seeing is that consumer demand is forcing the industry to change. There's been a significant reduction in meat intake because people are concerned for the environment, and consumers are putting demand on manufacturers to create more healthy products. We're encouraged by that.
Fantastic. Anton,
yes, literally two sides of the problem. On the physical activity side, I think PHE, Public Health England, in this country have to finally start using more modern ways of targeting users and driving behaviors, as opposed to a very old school, old-fashioned uniform propaganda through media. We know it doesn't work really, or whether it could have worked, and probably did work, but to an extent we've reached that limit. So it's a time for new solutions, more personalized, more digital. On the diet side, sugar tax is the answer, and that's a simplistic across the board approach. Definitely, I'm totally with Tim and on saying that there should be a much more kind of holistic view on essentially disincentivizing the food lobby of kind of pushing us with unhealthy food. So without a doubt.
Excellent. And I see Eleonora in view, so I think that's our time to call it quits. But we've got our Q&A session next, so we've still got room for more question and answers, I know. But anyway, thanks, Eleonora.
Yes, indeed. So thank you, Tina, so much for moderating this panel, and to our fabulous panelists who shared with us some very poignant personal stories, some really interesting myth busting around nutrition, how we can use data to help make better choices about food, and how we can also nudge people into doing exercise. And definitely a few books to add to our reading list. So for our viewers now, actually, depending on the type of pass that you have, you'll be able to continue the conversation with our speakers and moderators in a Q&A session. And then in terms of what's going to happen next on the health stage, we will be back for a really interesting session at 2 o'clock, looking at unlocking metabolism, what the latest thinking is. And that will be a session moderated by Joanne Hackett, who's the general partner in the healthcare practice at IZY.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.